Welcome to week 2. This week we're going to try a little something different. I'm going to provide you an audio cast of the week's lecture. I haven't quite figured out how to pause this lecture, so you might have to bear with me as I move through this unit. I also wanted to let you know that this PowerPoint will be available in doc sharing so that you can have more time if there's a particular slide or information that you want to get off a slide. You can pull it from the doc sharing in Unit 2. In addition, I wanted to draw your attention to the task to complete under Unit 2 that will give you a good overview of everything that you need to complete for this week. Jansen talks about, or doesn't talk about, he writes about why should someone participate in policy reform. And he comes up with 4 different reasons that this should happen. The first one is to promote the values that lie at the heart of social work and that are included in the profession's code of ethics, such as social justice, fairness, self-determination, and confidentiality. The second is to promote well-being. To promote the well-being of clients, consumers, and citizens by shaping the human service system to conform to the latest findings of social science and medical research. The fourth is to create effective opposition. To create effective opposition to groups and citizens that run counter to the NASW Code of Ethics and to the well-being of clients, consumers, and citizens, and also to put pressure on decision makers to approve and retain policies that advance citizens' well-being. The fourth reason is to change the composition of the government so that legislators and decision makers are more likely to advance such values as fairness and social justice and promote the well-being of citizens. To provide you an example of how policy advocacy moves through several different cycles, I provided you with some information on the Indian Child Welfare Act, more commonly known as ICWA. In 1879, Richard Pratt founded the first off-reservation boarding school, Carlisle Indian School. His policy was to kill the Indian and save the man. To do this, he proposed a policy of taking children from their homes at an early age and not allowing them to return home until they were young adults. This is one of many actions that took place that ended in the final act of the Indian Child Welfare Act. So right now I want you to pause this video and I want you to view the video, Unseen Tears, and read the articles and legislation related to ICWA that I have provided for you. The video and the act and links to the National Indian Child Welfare Association, I think that's right, NICWA, is found in Bibliography. There's also 2 articles found in doc sharing, and this is also tied to a weekly activity, and there are tasks for you to complete. So if you go under the unit in the left-hand column and click on weekly activity, you'll find the tasks that you need to complete. And then that document should be dropped into the appropriate drop box by Sunday at 11:55. So I'll let you pause here and watch that video. I believe it's about 30 minutes long, and then there's several different pieces to watch. Or if you choose, you could come back to this activity after viewing the rest of this lecture. For this week in chapter, Jansen talks about the ethical rationale. Why are certain policies developed? And so to expand on what Jansen relates in his text, I chose to draw from Cumming, Byers, and Pedrick text and talk about the different ethical models that they provide. The first one is the Utilitarian model, and this basically the core of it is to minimize harm and maximize good. The phrase, the end justifies the means, is associated with Unitarianism. I cannot say that word. In policy practice, the Unitarian perspective would prioritize, see, this is when the editing would be helpful, prioritize policies that have a positive impact on the largest population. And if some individuals were harmed as a result, that harm would be regarded as an acceptable loss, given the overall benefits of the community. And a good example of this is vaccination of children. It is well known that some children react very detrimentally to vaccinations, and some children even die from being vaccinated. But the government has decided that this policy of children being vaccinated is more important than exposing a larger amount of children to these diseases. The next ethical framework is distributive justice. This approach, one would set aside the consideration of one's own economic and social interests to focus on maximizing the fair allocations of resources to the most disadvantaged members of society. John Rawls, who is the individual who was the founder of this philosophy, talked about ethical decision makers should adopt a veil of ignorance. This is conscientiously setting aside or veiling their own interests and striving to impartially determine what would benefit the least advantageous members of society. In this one, we think about the greatest good for the greatest numbers. Okay, I'm sorry. As instead of thinking about the greatest good for the greatest members, the individual would ensure that the poorest of the poor benefit from public policy. And this is a good example of this is the U.S. Census Bureau's poverty guidelines. And this idea that if you set it low enough, then you will at least get the most disadvantaged individuals the resources that they need, and that you have to try to focus your intent on those individuals. Kantian ethics has the idea that no matter how many lives would be positively affected by a policy, if you adhere to the principle that it is wrong to exploit a vulnerable person, then ethically you could not support a policy that could harm some vulnerable individuals, even if the larger population benefited. So, this is completely opposite to the utilitarian point, because this says that if you're going to have vaccinations, that if even one child could be harmed, then it is not ethical to force vaccinations on anyone. Virtue ethics is to preserve it talks about preserving a policy practitioner's character as a good member of society by avoiding actions that could diminish the practitioner's integrity. So this would say that as long as the ethical decision-making outcome depends on what a given society considers to be good. The ethic of care has to do with how people can best live together in a more just society, and this comes from a feminist perspective. Toronto, this ethic of care was developed by feminist theorists Nell Noddings and Joan Toronto, and Toronto defines care as a specific activity that includes everything we do to maintain, continue, and repair our world so that we can live in it as well as possible. That world includes our bodies, ourselves, and our environments, all of which we seek to interweave in a complex, life-sustaining web. So, again, it focuses on the development of interdependence among society's members. So if we look at this in relation to policy development, and we think we can apply it to transportation policy. If we were to use an ethic of care perspective when thinking about transportation policy, we must also consider the whole continuum of the lifespan. For example, does the necessity of long commutes place undue burdens on parents of young children, jeopardizing the quality of early childhood care? Does the dependence on the automobile isolate senior citizens who may not be able to drive? Can the needs of individuals who use wheelchairs be met by car-focused transportation policy? So all of these factors would be necessary to consider before one could make a policy decision based on ethic of care. So here's a picture or a diagram to help you get an idea of how all these pieces fit together. So all around the edges are unethical actions, and in the center is the ethically encouraged permissible policy practice. And then we have some guidelines that help us. The NASW Code of Ethics, the NASW practice standards, laws, and societal norms. And then surrounding those is that gray area of ethically questionable activity. And that's where our ethical dilemmas arise. So in these PowerPoint presentations, I have these reflective moments. And these are times when it gives you an opportunity to think about the topic. So we're going to end this presentation today by having you think about this question. Which framework is most compatible to the NASW Code of Ethics?